Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte says he wants to double down on corruption. During his State of the Nation address, he added corruption was impeding progress on his controversial war on drugs and said nobody would be spared if found guilty. Now, for more on this, an expert joins us to provide more analysis into Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte's State of the Nation address. Eduardo Araral is an associate professor at the Kuan School of Public Policy here in Singapore. Eduardo, thanks for joining us. Firstly, President Duterte touched on quite a bit in his address. What was it that stood out for you?
Indeed, President Duterte touched on a large number of topics, but these are usual topics that he likes to dwell on, like drugs, corruption, red tape, so on and so forth. But one thing that stood out for me, Steve, is for the first time in the last 3 years, he admitted that he cannot win his war on drugs without dealing with the problem of corruption in government, especially in the Bureau of Customs and in the police. Because, Steve, in the last year alone, there were large amounts of smuggled drugs that came into the Philippines because of corrupt practices at the Bureau of Customs. And he realized that he cannot win his retail war on drugs against drug users on the streets if he cannot stop corruption at the Bureau of Customs. So I think the other things that he described are predictable and expected, but the fact that he recognized now the links between fighting corruption and winning the war on drugs is what stood out for me.
But Mr. Duterte also asked for the death penalty to be reinstated. So realistically, how is that? Is that possible, number one? And number two, what are the repercussions this would actually have?
Yeah, Glenda, they tried to do this 3 years ago, but the bill at that time did not pass the Senate because there's a lot of politicians in the Philippines who are cautious in pushing for the death penalty because it would anger the Catholic Church. And I think they've figured out a better way of framing the death penalty bill this time by limiting the sanctions against heinous crimes, plunder, and possession and distribution of a certain amount of drugs. Unlike before, it was a very, very broad definition, and that triggered a lot of opposition. But I think this time around, it would be more realistic because they have learned their lesson. The repercussion, your second question on the repercussion is that if the death penalty passes, then there is no need for the summary killings by the police, because now they are obliged to arrest the suspect, and the suspect would have much more latitude to go to the courts and hear their case, so the police don't have to be the judge, jury, and the executioner. But it is just a law, even if the death penalty passes. But the problem with the drug war in the Philippines is that the supply of most of these drugs come from overseas, from Latin America and from the Mekong Triangle. And by the time it reaches the Philippines, these are just small fish that gets caught. So it's a very difficult war. Even if you pass the death penalty, I don't think the war on drugs would soon end.
Yeah, certainly needs to be looking further up the food chain with regards to that. Another topic that he talked on was China and the dispute in the South China Sea, stressing a peaceful resolution. There were protests on the street protesting that President Duterte's approach to this has been too sort of soft on China. What do you make of his words today?
Actually, he knows that he's being criticized of being pro-China or being soft on China. So today you see the two sides of Duterte. One is the lawyer in him, and then the other one is a realistic politician. The lawyer in him says that he invoked, for the first time openly and publicly, he invoked the Hague ruling. And he said what is ours, and the West Philippine Sea is ours. So I think this is the first time that he publicly invoked the Hague ruling to allay the concerns of nationalist Filipinos. But the realist politician in him says that China is in possession and in control. So the best way forward is not to waive the Hague ruling, but to come to a political and diplomatic solution with China. And he said that the Philippines is now seeing the benefits with the fishermen Filipino fishermen are able to go back to this contested fishing grounds.
All right, well, many thanks for your thoughts this evening. Eduardo Araral, Associate Professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.